So very important question here, where I was teaching about evolution, how different skin colors appeared. Go and check it. Go and check it in my page. First of all, click here to share, and click this plus sign to follow me. So you will read about evolution, okay? And check this playlist. That's where you'll see it. So at the end of the day, somebody's asking about language. He said, "Can you explain the difference in language?" Language evolves. The way human beings and other living things evolved, the language we speak evolve. All right. So what happens? How are new words keep entering into a language? Old words keep dying out. Let's say you're Yoruba, for instance. If I dig up your great-great-grandfather, that is 5 people above you, and they speak their Yoruba, you will see that it's different from the one you're speaking now. But you may still be able to understand it, but it's different. I'll give you a good example. One day we went to Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. It's a country in West Africa, and we went from Nigeria. So we transversed West Africa till we landed 3 or 4 countries away in Côte d'Ivoire. We met a Yoruba community there. They still used to cook ewedu and stuff. These are Yorubas. They say they have never been to Nigeria. They are not Nigerians. They are based in Ivory Coast, and that's where their forefathers have been. So the times their forefathers migrated from Nigeria to Ivory Coast is lost on them. They can't remember. They can't remember ever having any linkage to Nigeria. But they still cook the original Yoruba delicacies. And they speak Yoruba, but then they speak French because the official lingua franca of Ivory Coast is French. So the Yorubas, they came with us, we were able to communicate with them in Yoruba because we were lost at the point, we were looking for directions. So, but once they found out they could speak Yoruba, they were able to communicate. But then they said that the Yoruba they were speaking is different. It was a bit difficult to understand what they are saying. But you have to put your ear down and take it easy before you can pick. So sometimes the discussions were taking a bit longer because there has to be an explanation to what they're saying. So it shows that a migration must have happened most likely from Nigeria because Nigeria is largely Yoruba. The majority of Yorubas in the world are in Nigeria. Let me put it that way. So most likely migrations happened hundreds of years ago. So here is how it happens. When a community stays separate from its original community, after some years, the language they speak changes. For instance, the language you speak, your parents speak is slightly different from the one you speak. Have you heard of Pidgin English in Nigeria from the 80s? Have you heard of all those ancient songs from 80s, 70s? Their Pidgin English is a bit different. The way they word it, the way they word their sentences. So this is how migration happens. Let's say a community is made up of 200 people, all right? In Africa, 200 people in a community. And then let's say a man marries 10 wives and produces 50 sons. Each of those 50 sons goes to neighboring communities and marries 10 wives each. You see that in less than 30 years, the community will be overpopulated. That community of 200 people will blow up to 2,000. So what happens is that the resources within the community starts becoming a problem. They no longer have enough farmable lands. The source of water is no longer enough. And a whole lot of things become a challenge. So the quick solution usually that is mostly adopted in Africa, other people have other kinds of solution to that. But in Africa, the quick solution is that some members of the community will migrate. So, for instance, one of those sons that had 7 wives, that had 50 grandchildren, 100 great-grandchildren, he would decide that we are moving out. My people, my lineage, we are moving out of this community. So he will send some of his young sons as hunters to go and hunt, go and scout for a good land that they can go and inhabit. So usually they will travel 3 to 5 days in different directions by forest, looking for a land that is close to a source of water and close to land that is farmable, arable lands, okay? So when they find it, after 3 to 5 days, they all come back with reports, and then the head of the community will decide to initiate the migration. So this man with his 100 descendants will move. And they will take, let's say, 1 week, 2 weeks to arrive at the location. And then they clear the ground, build houses, and then they start living there. Remember that when they first arrived, their language will be identical to the one in the original town they came from. But give them 50 years, 100 years. When the original people that made the migration have died out, this is a new generation. What you will see is that the language has changed significantly. When they finally reconnect with the original town they came from, you will see that they now have a different dialect. It's now a bit difficult to understand what they are saying. So if you go to US now, you have Southern accent, you have Chicago accent, you have this accent, that accent. So every city have a slightly different accent. In fact, in Africa, some people that did some studies say that there's a new accent every 1.5 kilometers. Any direction in Africa, every 1.5 kilometers, the people there speak slightly different tongue. In a place like Igbo land, it's way worse. In Igbo land, almost every compound has a slightly different dialect. Every compound, I swear. Not to talk of every village. So, but how do you know that these people were once related? If their language, if the dialect they speak is mutually intelligible. Mutually intelligible is if you can understand one language, you just need to listen well and you will understand the other. That means they are the same language, just different dialects. But if it is mutually unintelligible, that means it's a different language. So there is a difference between dialect and language. So a dialect, when a language evolves into different dialects, okay, because the populations are split. Now, if those dialects stay different for 1,000 years, they will evolve into their own languages, different languages. So them evolving into their own languages now will make it impossible for somebody understanding one to understand the other. For instance, if you can understand the Yoruba language, it doesn't mean you can understand French. You can't understand French. You still have to learn French from ground up because the two languages are mutually intelligible. What it means is that the French has split from the Yoruba people for at least 1,000 years. In reality, it will be about 70,000 years. All right? So in Igbo land, there are people, for instance, people from Delta, they will say they are not Igbos, but when they speak their language, Igbo people can understand. I'll be like, that's a dialect of Igbo. We can understand you, and you can understand us. Like, what are you saying? You know? It's because that's a dialect of Igbo language, meaning that at some point in recent times, in the last 200-300 years, they used to be one community. That's why the languages are still mutually intelligible. So languages split completely diverging after 1,000 years of living separate. If you come to Yoruba language now, you will see that there are many words in Yoruba language that are similar or identical to words in Igbo language. Like the word for goat, the word for mouth, you know, the word for stone. So many words are similar. But if a Yoruba person is speaking, an Igbo person can't understand. You can't use your knowledge of Igbo to understand Yoruba. It's not going to work. Why? Because Yoruba and Igbo have stayed apart for 1,000 years at least. You know, all humans in the world now started from one village. So sometimes when scientists are trying to know how related tribes are, they can use the language. How different the languages are can tell how long they have been together or apart. So as people are moving around, the languages change. Even you can be in your village in Africa and you are speaking your village language fluently, and then you get a visa or scholarship and you move abroad. You stay 10 years abroad. When you come back to your village, you will notice that how you speak your village language has changed. You are no longer fluent in your language. Most of your sentences have English words now. That's a modification. And you did only 10 years. Now imagine that you stayed apart from your village for 100 years. It becomes way more difficult for people from your village to understand what you're saying. If you stayed apart for 1,000 years, it becomes impossible. Like whatever you are speaking will now become a totally different language. So language evolves. Today, we see people, social media helping to introduce new words in languages that our parents can't understand. The one we have in Nigeria now is no grief for anybody. You understand? No grief for LOL, LOL, IDGE, I don't give a fuck. You know, there are so many things that are being introduced into our language from social media, and our parents are lost on that. Now imagine that continues for 1,000 years. New languages get created.